What's up, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Loop Live. My name is Matt McCoy. I'm the founder of loopcommunity.com, and I'm the host of the Loop Live show. And today we've got a very special treat for you. I'm excited about this interview because as a worship leader, this person's songs have influenced me. I've led these songs over and over and over and love them. He's the songwriter of Lord, I Need You, Because He Lives. One of my personal favorites, throwback a long time ago, Your Grace is Enough. I remember that one a lot when I was first started leading worship. And so today we have the one and only Matt Maher, artist, songwriter, worship leader. I'm really excited to talk to him about his journey. And so wherever you're watching, if you've got questions for Matt, type them into the comment box. If we get some good questions, we're going to actually answer them live. So type them into the chats wherever you're watching from and buckle up. Here we go. Let's bring in Matt. What's up, Matt?
Hey, Matt. That was easy.
Yeah. Whoa. Should I look at you? Wait, can I look at you this way? I should look at, hey, Matt. Yeah, two Matts.
Two Matts.
So where are you coming to us from? I when we were setting up, I saw it looked like a studio. Is this like a studio in Nashville somewhere, or is this your house, or what?
This is a studio writing space that behind my house that has been in evolution for 8 years. So
Wow.
started out, yeah. So we live in East Nashville, um, kind of the northern part called Inglewood. That's I say where hipsters get put out the pasture when they start having kids. And we the house that we bought, there was a building behind the house that was like a machine shop, and so it kind of turned into a detached garage mother with like a guest room for grandparents when they were visiting, and then there's kind of a big room for me to write in. And recently I just did a renovation and kind of made a control room.
Yeah.
So uh it's kind of brand new. I'm just like still can smell the new paint kind of a thing. But
Yeah.
yeah,
That's
so
a that's a game changer to have a space you can go away from kids, out of the house, and it's not too far.
yes.
Go in and get a cup
No.
of coffee, come back.
Yes, about 40 feet. So,
Yeah.
um, but that separation is really, it is helpful, and it's helpful not just to get away, but it's helpful to step away. Honestly,
Hmm.
in the working process, um, one of the hardest things to do sometimes in the middle of writing a song or trying to flesh out an idea is, to step away, to help get ready for dinner
Yeah.
and to
Right.
trust that the creative idea is still going to be there after you have to put down your kids for bed. But
Yep.
um, but it's also a good test of faith in a way, I guess.
So when I was introducing you, I said artist, songwriter, and then worship leader. Would you call yourself a worship leader?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think if
Okay.
anyone has a gift of music, I mean, part of being a Christian is being a worshiper,
Hmm.
and I think some weeks I look at my kids and they're leading me. Um, But I do think that there is something about, uh, recognizing that you have a gift and, you have a proclivity for gathering people and pointing people in a direction or facilitating, everyone facing in a direction. And so I think I think the context of what you're doing determines how you do it, but I think what you're doing is, it's kind of the same thing,
How
if that
did you
makes any
get
sense.
it totally makes it yeah, it's awesome. Can you give us just a little bit about a little of your background? Like how did you even get started doing
Mhm.
music, leading worship?
Yeah. Well, I've been playing music my whole life. I was born and raised in Newfoundland, Canada. When I was 20 years old, my parents got separated. My mother was American, and she moved back to Arizona to be with her parents who had retired in northern Arizona. So she got a job teaching in the valley in Phoenix, in the East Valley, which is Tempe, right by Arizona State University. So I switched universities got accepted into Arizona State and had to spend a year getting residency. And while I was doing that, I had a cousin my age who was going to Arizona State or U of A in Tucson. But I spent about a month when I first moved hanging out with her and all her friends, and they all went to church. And most of her friends were part of a Catholic charismatic community. And so I kind of hung out with them. And, I'd been away from church. I was born and raised Catholic. So to me, just the idea of Christianity in general was crazy. So so then the charismatic portion of it didn't seem that crazy. Um, sort of, I guess, in scope of it all. But by the end of the summer, early into the fall, I was going to church again every week, and there was a very active youth ministry program called Life Teen, which is kind of like Young Life in the Catholic Church. And I started helping out as like a volunteer, and then the music director at the parish heard me play piano and was like, "Hey, we have this youth service on Sunday nights. Do you want to start playing?" And so I said, "Sure." And I ended up kind of being part time there for a year and a half, and then ended up at a larger church in Mesa, Arizona, and worked. So I worked in local church ministry on and off for, my goodness, the better part of 15 years, maybe, um, 14, 15 years. And that's all I did. I just was a music minister at a church. So I graduated with a jazz performance degree in 1999, and around the same time, the church hired a new youth minister, and he came from Louisiana, and he's like, "Hey, I want to start a Bible study, and I want you to lead worship." And this was 1999. I was graduated from college, and so I'd had a conversion. I'd given my heart to Christ. I was involved in ministry, but it was, a lot of the music stuff we were playing was pretty liturgical, or I was trying to write songs and to play in coffee shops. But then along came this friend of mine who became one of my best friends, and he said this different thing. I was like, "I want you to lead worship," and I'm like, "Well, what's that?" And then he sort of described it, and I was like, "Oh, it was the thing they did at the charismatic prayer meetings. That's what you're talking about, like the
Mm.
singing of songs and then spontaneous praying that happens in between, and specifically asking for the presence of God, the Holy Spirit, to do something, to transform hearts, to illuminate minds and consciousness, like to convict hearts to the reality of God, or the need for repentance, or um, just a spirit of worship. And so I started doing that. It was a Monday night. It was a Bible study with like 40 kids, and I'd wheel a projector across the parking lot of the church into this house, and it was a projector with like the bulb, where the bulb was more expensive than the projector.
Yep, I remember
And
that.
I had transparencies, and I needed music, so I went to a Christian bookstore, and I found a Passion CD. And um, turns out Integrity was sending Paul Baloche albums to one of my mentors, who's also a music minister. And so yeah, I started singing all those songs at that time, just like everyone else. And then I heard the music of Delirious around 2000, and I think that it was Mesomorphos, that album, that just sort of it unlocked my imagination to the possibility of, oh, maybe this is what I'm supposed to be doing, because I wanted to
Mm.
do film scoring. And so that's when the writing piece of it started. But I think the first piece of it started was driving around in my car listening to live worship albums, and then trying out the stuff that they used to say in between songs, trying it out on this Monday night Bible study. I didn't have a clue what I was doing. I didn't have a band. I didn't have anything. I just had me and a guitar and,
Yeah.
20 to 30 high school students. And that's kind of
Wow.
how I got started.
So you answered a little bit of my next question, which is, so what was it that you always thought you would be doing? Was it being an artist songwriter? You mentioned for a second there that it was a film score, which is interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, film music was what I wanted to do. I actually didn't really think I still don't think I necessarily have the best voice in the world. It's loud. I know that much. I've been I've been told a lot by people, "You have a very loud voice." Um, it's like I have 2 volumes, that's it, on and off.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
I think for me, I think it was the Malcolm Gladwell principle of the 10,000 hours of mastery. I sang at church 3 nights a week, and it was in the process of singing these songs over and over and over again that I found my voice, and I mean that in every sense of the word. I spiritually found my voice. I think I psychologically found my voice. I think emotionally I found my voice, and musically, I think I found the place where my voice sounded the best, sounded the sweetest. And
Mm.
it's all those things, you know. It's not one or the other. It's all of it working together in tandem. And the technique side for some people is like some people could be savants. It's just they're doing it unconsciously. They aren't even thinking about it. And for me, it definitely wasn't that. I had to really, really work at the problems that I had in my singing. But eventually, yeah, I found my voice, and then from then, I think once you find your voice, it starts shaping your songwriting for sure.
So when did you start writing your own songs?
It was pretty early on. I mean, honestly, I moved in 1995, and I remember 1996, I was trying to write a retreat theme song for the youth group at this church I was at, but it was really bad. And and you know, the guy that I first mentored with, uh, he was much more inspired by like Stephen Curtis Chapman. So a lot of the stuff that he was writing, which is Stephen Curtis Chapman was amazing, but it's not necessarily like it wasn't worship music. Like The Great Adventure is a great song, but it's not, and that's what that kind of music was. So the first thing I wrote was this song called Better Than Gold, which was kind of like a really poor attempt at a Stephen Curtis Chapman song.
Yeah.
Um, because I didn't have his voice, and I'm not Stephen Curtis Chapman. That like, what makes his songs so great is him. It's the combination of his heart and his voice and his talent, blah, blah, blah. So 1995, I started trying to write, like, songs out of my faith, and I think 2000 was the first time I wrote a worship song that felt felt like me. It was more liturgical. It was a song called "Love Has Come," and I wrote it for the theme of Advent and Christmas, and it was kind of this Celtic thing, so it had a bit of a river dance flair. Um, and it, and I think that was kind of the first steps. That was the beginning of it, and um, and then it's the refinement process. You got to write a lot of bad songs before you write a half decent one.
And we actually have a question that just came up about songwriting,
Yep.
and it is, how do you determine when a song is actually finished? And this is actually something that I've experienced too, because I write worship stuff, and you can kind of just keep going at it forever and ever. But when is it actually done? Like, when do you stop tweaking lyrics? When do you say, let's put this in the
Well,
books and move
y-
on?
yeah. I mean, I think now they get stopped. Now they stop when people sing them at church because there's a electronic account of it.
Yeah, that's
What I
true.
would say is, I mean, this is a great example. Your grace is enough. I wrote that song in spring of 2003. So next year it'll be 20 years since I wrote that song. And I didn't record it until August, July or August of 2003. And or no, it might have been this year. It's a little bit hazy. At the time I was going through a treatment for hepatitis C.
Oh wow.
So I have like a brain fog over 2
Yeah,
years of my life. I don't really remember. There's gaps,
yeah.
but, I'm pretty sure I wrote that song in the spring of 2003 and then recorded this album. But one of my mentors kinda helped me A&R or choose the songs for the album, and, I had written the song and I was singing it at a weekly worship night. But the song at the time, the pre-chorus was the chorus, and the chorus was the pre-chorus. So I made a demo of it, and it was like, like it was like, "Great is your faithfulness, O God, with Jacob. You wrestle with the sinner's restless heart. You lead us by still waters, and there is nothing can keep us apart. And your grace is enough. And your grace is enough." Like that was the pre-chorus, and then the chorus was,
So
"Remember
remember
your
your
people."
people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
remember your children, remember your promise, oh God of salvation. And he just said to me, he goes, "Look, I think you need to switch those two things." He goes,
Hmm.
"This is free advice." He said, "You can take it or leave it." He said, "But if I was you, I would switch those." And I'm like, "Really?" He's like, "Matt, you wrote that's an amazing chorus." He goes, "I've never heard someone sing Your Grace is Enough in a song
Yeah.
that simply." So so I switched them,
Yep.
and I switched the melodies, the chord progressions were the same how they were at the time, which the chorus of that song, the chorus used to be a big walk up. And then when and so that's a great example of like that song was written, then it was changed, then it was recorded, then Chris Tomlin heard it, and then him and Ed Cash changed the chords on the chorus.
Didn't they change the lyrics
To
too?
They took out God of Jacob.
Okay.
Uh
Yeah, I thought I remember there being something different about in the verse.
Yeah, and it I remember calling Chris. We had only talked 2 other times, and I look back now and I'm like, he was incredibly gracious because, I knew, okay, this is a really big deal. Like, I
Yeah.
have this sense that, like, there's a new doorway opening in my life that I'm gonna walk through, and
Hmm.
but I made he basically said, he goes, "Hey, I wanna change the verse to 'Great is your faithfulness, O God, you wrestle with the sinner's heart.'" And take out God of Jacob and wrestle with the sinner's restless heart. And at the time, the reason why I wrote God of Jacob was because I'd been going to a Bible study and talked very specifically about God reveals aspects of his nature, specifically through specific relationships in the Old Testament. So
Yeah.
the way he is with Abraham is different than the way he is with Isaac, is different than the way he is with Jacob. And so for me, tying that God of Jacob with Paul's encounter with Christ and him saying, "My grace is sufficient for you in your weakness." Like it was very specific.
Yeah.
And but Chris was like, "I just think it sings easier."
Yeah. Yep.
So, and then I think the changes on the chorus really do. Like when I first heard that, I was like, "Oh yeah, no, that really helps." And
Yeah.
still to this day, I struggle with maybe it's the film scoring side. I want to put too many chord changes in a song,
Yeah.
and sometimes a lot of times less is more. So
I'll tell you, Matt, I have played that song. I can't even tell you how many, probably hundreds of times. I feel like just looking back when I was a teenager leading worship, I maybe have played that song more than you have. No, probably not.
I
But
don't know.
I've played it. Yeah, you've probably played every night you play it, but I just can't even. That's probably the song I've played the most as a worship leader, I think. Um,
Yeah.
and it just had a huge impact. I feel like on my worship leading. Uh,
Hmm.
it was a huge song too, like in the early 2000s. How do you get songs that you write, and maybe it's different for you now, but back then when you were a brand new songwriter entering the scene, how do you get songs that you write in front of someone like Chris Tomlin, or how did you get your songs
I,
even noticed or heard?
yeah. I mean, what I would say is I couldn't have orchestrated that
Mm,
if I wanted to. I mean, the week we sang it the very first time at my church. So I'd written it 6 months earlier. The very first time we ever sang it at my church was the weekend that Mike Yaconelli and the staff of Youth Specialties were in town for the National Youth Workers Convention. And they came a week early because they wanted to come see this crazy Catholic church they had heard about where there was um, it was it was a Catholic liturgy, but then there was contemporary music and there was a reverence about the kids and they were just kind of,
yeah.
and so they came to check it out, and I met Tick after we went out to dinner, and he was like, he walked up to me holding the worship aid because we used to print song sheets, all the lyrics. He's like, "Dude, did you write this song?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he goes, "This song's incredible." And I was like, "Oh, thanks, man." I mean, I didn't really know. I mean, I was like,
Yeah.
kind of in a bubble. And so he reached out like 4 days later and was like, "Hey, can you come down to the conference and lead that song at the end of a session?" And I was like, "Sure." And then he called the next day and was like, "Hey, I think I'm going to get Tomlin and his band to back you up. Is that okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think that's fine."
Yeah.
And, same thing. It was this moment of like, whoa, this feels totally foreign, but um, like I couldn't have planned it. Um,
Yeah.
and I still to this day, like that's been my experience, like with my music is, which just sounds funny because I, you know, you strike me that like even like even youth group, being in youth group 20 years ago or leading these songs. There was a period like when I gave my heart to Jesus, I said no to self-promotion. Uh, that was literally part of the gospel, or at least the
Mm,
way it was presented to me. I've decided to follow Jesus, the cross before me, the world behind me.
mm,
And the world includes the like not just the world, but like an obsession with materialism or an obsession with personal gain. And so many of the people that I looked up to in my journey really talked about death of self. So, my advice still to anyone, it sounds crazy, is don't get a YouTube page. Don't spend your money on Instagram. Root yourself in your local church and get lost in the presence of God and do the work. Do the hard work of prayer, but also the work of being of as a songwriter. Like it's really hard to work on your craft as a songwriter if you're constantly obsessed with your numbers
mhm.
of who's watching, who's looking, how is this happening? Because what I'll say is looking out into the church, when somebody writes a great song, it has wings built into it.
Mm, yeah.
I mean,
Eh,
it just does. It
right.
just gets around. You know what I mean? And I think we forget that. And I think there is an element of surrender, not just intrinsic to the gospel, but intrinsic to a gospel way of life.
Yeah.
Uh, that really is rooted in the here and the now and in the present moment of where you are. So I always tell people the best way to get your songs heard is to write a great song. Still,
Mm. That's good
that's
advice.
the way to get that's the way to get your songs heard. And what I would say, it's like you go, well, I wrote this song and it's just as good as this other song, and I'm like, but is it just the same?
Mhm.
Because if it's just the same, but there's already another song that says the same thing, then don't say the same thing.
Yeah. Right.
Like push yourself. Um,
Yeah.
Worship music is not a musically driven format. It's a lyrically driven format. It's about the text. That's what makes hymns so incredible. I mean, sometimes it's a great chord change. It's a 16th century like chord movement, or like an 18th century, or whatever, uh, kind of chorale type thing that makes its way, or sometimes it's a gospel riff that like still speaks, or someone will come up with a new variation or permutation on the same seven chords that we all use, and that's like a little innovation, and that's great. But
Yeah.
oftentimes, more than not, the thing that really drives the music of the people of God is what are we saying?
Mm.
And because central to the church is the word.
Yep.
And so it's like going back to the
Wow.
Psalms, going back to the scriptures, going back to the prayer closet, and coming out of it with that revelation of what God has said to you. That's the creativity. And the music comes, the music follows, the arrangements follow, the guitar riffs follow, the drum kick pattern follows. But if you don't have a great lyric that isn't saying something new and compelling, that's the difference maker, I think, still. but maybe I'm old fashioned, but and it doesn't have to
I
be a
love
lot of words.
yeah.
Yeah.
What you just said, I think is brilliant. I've actually never thought about it that way. That actually what is at the root of Christianity is the word. And
Yes.
that is really
Yeah.
interesting. That is why lyrics are very, very important in what we're singing, what we're saying to
Yeah.
God.
Yeah. Words matter because the word matters. Like
Yeah.
it,
Right. Wow.
so
That's
it,
so good.
and, and it's in some ways like all we have is our creativity, right?
Yeah.
That's part of our human nature of how we're made in the image and likeness of God, is he gave us the ability to create and craft.
Hmm.
And music, art is this central form of expression that's unique to the human experience. It's patterned all throughout nature and creation.
Yep.
Um, but we're the ones who can point it out. We're the ones that God gave the ability to name it, to
Yeah.
catalog it, and then to turn around and use it as inspiration to craft something. And yeah, I mean, it's still to this day, uh, someone will come along with a great song, and the thing is, it's what it's saying.
Hmm.
I remember the first time my oldest son, after having a bad dream, when we were getting ready to, he was coming on a bus with me, and I taught him the chorus to "No Longer Slaves," and he sang, "I'm no longer a slave to fear. I am a child of God." And like that, it like cut right through me. I almost get emotional just thinking about that moment. And it's a great melody, but it's the words.
Wow. So we're talking about a lot of things actually that I was not planning on talking about, but this is actually really, really good. I have a question for you of so
Yeah.
someone like you, it's pretty I feel like it's a given that if you're going to be writing songs, you're going to then probably be recording those songs and putting them on an album to release them.
Mm.
But what about someone who's not an artist? Maybe they're wanting to be an artist, but they're not. And they write worship songs. Is it worth them recording them and putting them out? Or is it more of like, no, just write songs and then just see if your church likes it? And you know what I
I
mean?
mean,
Like, or is
yes.
part of the work actually, putting some money into it and making an album and recording it, releasing it on Spotify?
I think the work always, as it pertains to the church, I can't speak for the rest of society or the music industry, but I
Hmm.
do think a pattern that would be beneficial would be that primarily someone in a local church would look at their gift primarily as to serve the local church
Hmm.
and not for the whole world. Every time I wrote a song, um, early on, I wasn't thinking about people in different countries and different languages. I wasn't thinking about CCLI. I wasn't thinking about some massive church, finding the chorus and wanting to rewrite the verses or like whatever, speculative story. I was
Yeah.
literally thinking about specific people that I knew, that I played at their wedding or I played at a baptism or I played at a funeral, and then someone got cancer or someone's marriage was on the rocks or someone was struggling with addiction. And and um, Mark Hall from Casting Crowns, still so many, he does there, a lot of their music isn't necessarily, corporate worship music, but everything that he writes comes out of his experience in the local church. And I think uh, that it would be great for people who are starting small and they're wondering where to invest their time in their gift. Like I said, I don't, I can't tell you what to do, but spending money on a recording and all of that versus investing, because that's, we tithe our time, we tithe our talents, and we tithe our treasure. And spending on a money and recording, it could be that God wants you to help support the lives of an engineer and some studio musicians. I'm not going to tell you not to do that,
Yeah.
but but um but I can guarantee you that trying out your songs in the local church and letting them become the song that body believe that it they're able to rally around it, it won't not benefit you in the long run. Like the first project I ever made, I only made 3,000 copies, and I literally sold it out of the back of my car, but I made it for my church. That's who I made
Yeah.
it for. I wasn't, and it was because people were asking me to. It wasn't like I had a laptop and I had all this technology, and because if I did, I probably would have been tempted to do it. And because I didn't, I think that that process of self-denial and kind of praying and having someone speak into it, and the barometer we set was when when every week after church, someone is coming up to you saying, "When are you gonna make a CD?" It's like, then it's time.
Mm.
And so we just waited. I just waited. It was like a year and a half. It was the longest 2 years of my life. I was trying to finish college and, so my advice, yes, would be to someone, um, I'm not saying you shouldn't work on recording. Find like the great thing about technology now, it's so easy. I mean, I became best friends with GarageBand and then
Mhm.
Logic. I demo all my songs. I try to demo them like they're full studio recordings as much as I can. I call it the George Lucas School of like audio,
Yeah.
because of how he made the Star Wars prequels. It like I try to like come up with guitar riffs. I try to come up with band arrangements. I try to do all that stuff um, as an exercise of my creativity.
Mhm.
But when it comes to worship music, I still think the greatest test is you should absolutely sing it at your church. And if you can't hear anyone singing,
Yeah.
um, I let it speak to you.
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
great, it's a it's a great barometer, you
yeah,
know?
that's so good. It is a good test.
Yeah.
All right, sticking on the subject of songwriting, we actually have another question that came in of, so is there a certain amount of time you let a song sit, uh, unfinished? So, you start writing a song, maybe you get like 3/4 of the way through it, you can't come up with the bridge or can't come up with the verse.
Yep.
How long will you let a song like that sit before you finish it?
I mean, I have 2 songs right now. Um, and one of them I know when it gets done, it's gonna be a really, really great song, but it's just not done. And
Mhm.
I started it during the pandemic, and I just haven't finished it. And a lot of it is trust. It's just sort of saying, "Well, that's not done yet, and it's not time for it to be done."
Yeah.
It's um, for whatever reason, I thought
Oh,
my
I lost
phone
you.
was set
Oh, there
on
you
no
are.
notifications, and I got a phone call.
Yeah,
Um,
it's all good.
uh, for some reason in my music, I joke maybe it was because I'm Catholic. I've met a lot of winemakers, and I don't drink a massive amount of alcohol or something.
Yeah.
Um, Occasionally, I'll have a glass of wine, but but I love the process of winemaking because it takes time. And the best wine comes from the ground that gets really irritated and challenged by weather extremes. The
Yep.
soil, content has to get, um, you know, uh, has to be just right. The temperature has to be just right. And I think creating is a lot like that. You have to be exposed to these extremes. Wine needs stress.
Yeah.
Stress it changes the grapes. And so I think stress is an inevitable part of life. And I think, particular to the creative process, sometimes you have to sit in the tension of wanting a song to be finished and also having the humility and the objectivity. You have to check your ego at the door and just say, it's not happening right now. So I'm going to walk away. And there's a million
Yeah.
reasons why I want it to happen, but it's not happening.
Yeah.
And so I have to acknowledge that.
And I think that even goes along with the music career part of it, of just being trusting of God. Let him open the doors. Let him direct your steps. Let him,
Oh, Matt, I
you
lost
know,
you. Give me one
if
second.
he wants to, he lost me. If God wants to send a song around the world, let him do that.
Can you hold on one
Yeah.
second? I'm so sorry.
No, it's all good. Can you hear me all
We're
right?
having technical difficulties here.
Check 1, 2. Can you hear me? Testing. Testing 1, 2. AirPods. Hey, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Can you hear
Okay.
me?
How about now?
Hey,
Yeah.
isn't it funny? AirPods are a little bit glitchy sometimes. I've noticed that. I was just saying, I think that it goes along with the whole what we were talking about earlier too about just music career and just trusting God to open up the doors. If He wants to send a song around the world, let Him do that. I think it's Andy Rozier. I've heard Andy Rozier talk about just like there's just some songs that like God like just breathes air into and it goes all over the world. You know, like a song like Revelation song or The Blessing, right? Like just exploded everywhere. And no person could have just made that happen. Like it was just God's like, I want that one. I want the world to sing that song right now with what's happening. And I think that it's patience and trust. You know, trusting that God is going to be working through you. So I think Matt, we've taken up so much of your time already. We totally went a very different direction than I was planning on. But to close this, I'm wondering. My last question for you is related to worship leaders. We talked to a lot of worship leaders at Loop Community who, you know, they're in the trenches all week long, kind of like you were, you know, for 15 years, you're at a church. You did that for a long time. You've been doing this for a long time. Is there anything you would tell a worship leader just that would keep them going, that would keep them from burnout, that would keep them in it for the long haul?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay? I'm just making sure you
Yeah,
can hear me.
it's
Okay.
perfect. Yeah.
You know, I think the thing that I would say is that uh, so much of the creative process, I think, when it comes to specifically the church, um, it's about learning to cultivate a heart that sees kingdom significance in small things, in
Mm,
insignificance, in self, in and um, so much emphasis is spent or kind of spent or focused on being in front of people, and I really do think that God's heart is always towards. I was literally having breakfast with another songwriter this morning, a friend of mine, and we were talking about how at the heart of being a great worshiper is a heart of meekness.
mm,
And I think even as a leader, embodying, for me, wake up every day and to walk into a room and to not gravitate toward the most talented, the most successful, but to find the person who's basically asking, why am I there? Um,
mm,
because I know how that feels. And I think embodying that as a leader in the way that we serve our churches, in the way that we minister to our worship teams, not when we're on a platform, but when we're about to rehearse, after, when we're winding cables, when we're talking to people. Um, and I'll say selfishly as a songwriter, like, you have no idea when the spirit of revelation is going to strike. And if you basically only look at as my songs only come from this narrow band of living versus the entirety of my life, which includes the entirety of my service to my local community, you're depriving yourself and you're depriving God of opportunities to speak to you. I mean, I can't tell you how many times as a songwriter somebody said something or something happened in the middle of church, and it was the most unlikely time for a song lyric to pop into my head, but it popped into my head. And the reason, I think, was because I was fully abandoned to the need for that and just present to the moment. And it was the combination of abandonment and 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 meekness towards God and just
being totally present to humbly serving,
Mm.
um, that I think God, I think he honors, and I think it makes you more available to the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. That's so good, Matt. I appreciate it. I really am thankful that you would take the time to talk to all the worship leaders at Loop Community. We went a little longer than I had promised you,
You're
but
totally fine.
this was good stuff, man. I mean, I feel like I could just keep on going, but I actually really like that we kind of went this direction with songwriting, because I know there's a lot of worship leaders who are really uh, dabbling in that, interested in it. And so I just appreciate you sharing your heart and your story. And thank you for all the songs that you've given worship leaders to lead. It's awesome.
Can I say one more thing really quick?
Yes.
I just want to say, like, I know there's a lot of people interested in songwriting right now. And what I would tell you is that the more you just grow in your capacity in your heart as a worshiper, just for the gift of worshiping God, songs will come.
Mm.
But if you try to make your songwriting come first, eventually your well is going to run dry, and you won't understand why. And the reason is because you put the cart before the horse.
Wow.
Songwriting as an overflow of a prayerful, worshipful heart. God
Yeah.
desires, God desires, not even he desires our worship. There's a prayer that says, "You have no need of our worship, but our desire to praise you is it in and of itself a gift to us." And it's out, God knows he's trying to teach us a pattern for living, that if we live a life of worship, out of the overflow of that comes the creativity for whatever field or endeavor we're doing.
Oh, I love that. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, your heart, and your songs with the church. Huge impact you're making. So thanks. Hopefully we'll get to connect again soon.
Thank you so much.
Yep. See you.
We'll see you.
All right, you guys. Really great conversation there with Matt. I got to say, I love being the host of Loop Live because I kind of see it as I get an hour of personal coaching as a worship leader songwriter, and I think it's awesome because I get to ask all sorts of questions. And I'm personally very curious about myself, and that was a really great conversation. A lot of really good stuff in there. Whatever it is that you're going to walk away from this conversation with, type it down in the chats wherever you're watching this, down below on Facebook, YouTube, and write down what is it that you took away from this conversation with Matt. And of course, if you have not listened to Matt's music, make sure you go check him out on Spotify, Apple Music. We also have all of the multi-tracks available for Matt's songs at Loop Community. So make sure you go to Loop Community, look up Matt's songs, grab them. He's got a new song called Leaning. Make sure you go check that out, listen to it. We didn't get to talk about that song, but make sure you go listen to it. And as always, thanks for joining us at Loop Live. We'll see you soon.